Well, why don't we go ahead and begin? We will be recording the session today for folks who may have missed it. And we're so thrilled to be able to talk about this incredibly important topic, especially at Park and based on the students that we serve, talking about teaching the contemporary student. And I'm going to hand it over to our amazing external experts who are joining us here today. They're going to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about some incredible work they've been doing and share their expertise with us. And how the session will run is that they'll share their information with us first, and then we'll open up the last portion of today's session for Q&A to address any questions that you might have.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. In just a couple slides, we will introduce ourselves to you, but we did want to start with a land acknowledgement, which we use regularly on our campus. So I'm going to hand off to Shyama to handle that.
Sure. We acknowledge that the land each of us live, learn, and thrive upon are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of indigenous and tribal nations. Our homes and institutions are on the original homelands of the Piscataway, Manahoac, Osage, and Upper Pima, and the Hohokam tribal nations, and were ripped apart alongside the brutal system of African American enslavement. We acknowledge the genocide and systems of oppression that have dispossessed indigenous peoples of their lands, and we honor and respect the diverse, beautiful people still connected to this land.
So we know each of us is sitting on different land right now as we engage in this session, as we've all shared the different places we are, but we hope you'll take a moment today to recognize the space that you're holding. So before we introduce ourselves, we wanted to just do a real quick brainstorm, and you can use the chat to do this, to think about who is coming to college today. Certainly, you're here today, so you have some sort of awareness or attention to the reality that the students coming to college right now are not all 18-year-old traditional age, starting as freshman students that colleges were originally built for. And so we like to start when we talk to people about serving contemporary students by really just having you think for a second and brainstorm about who you're seeing in your classroom and on your campuses and in your interactions, and what makes them outside of kind of the previous norm of who was coming to college. So feel free, as we start introducing ourselves, to drop your ideas in the chat about who is joining us at our institutions today. So just for a quick overview of what we'll be doing today, we're going to introduce ourselves so you know who we are. We're going to talk about who contemporary students are and how they show up in our spaces. Contemporary is not a term that many places use, but we hope that more will start adopting that language. We'll also talk about what challenges contemporary students are particularly facing, both inside and outside of the classroom, and how institutions are rising to the task of serving them well. And we'll talk about what their specific needs are, as well as the tools that we have been using and the team at Mason has adopted to really put key strategies in place. So that's our plan for today, very quickly. So who are we? My name is Sally Lorentson. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as an assistant vice president in our division of University Life, which is our student affairs division here at George Mason University. And George Mason is located just outside of the nation's capital. And we have 3 campuses in Northern Virginia, along with a campus in Songdo, South Korea. And my portfolio is primarily focused on student transition and student success. But I'm here today because with some of the members of the team, I've gotten to be kind of a pioneer in building out contemporary student services as a model and a center on campus, and really the first in the nation. So we're excited to talk with you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shyama Kuver. My pronouns are she, her, herself. And I've been at George Mason for about almost 5 years. And it's been a really great experience to be here. I work within Contemporary Student Services as the Associate Director. My job encompasses working with our campus partners and external partners to broaden and deepen our support services for contemporary students. So a lot of that means that not only do we advocate, but we're always trying to use data as leverage to support our students and to also drive home that contemporary students are not just our office's students, but they're literally all across campus and they're everybody's student.
And I round out the trifecta. My name is Dr. Joisanne Rodgers. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Contemporary Student Services here at Mason. I'm in my second year here, and I worked with post-traditional students at a non-traditional institution before coming to Mason, and my dissertation research is around that as well. So fit me perfectly in to be hired into this place and space. And so really excited to lead this team doing a lot of work with a lot of different students across our Mason community. So when we say contemporary students, it's often, as Sally said, new nomenclature for folks. So we're going to start by giving some definition to that. And admittedly, this is our Mason definition, right? The joy of that contemporary kind of title or nomenclature is that it can move and emerge and flow with the student population. So we're talking about specifically adult learners, which I saw in the chat. Y'all were looking at our website. I feel like you went right down the list. I love it. Foster care alumni, fully online students, our military veteran connected folks, as well as our off-campus or commuter students. The overlap in that is between our off-campus students and these populations is real high. It's not a completely overlapped Venn diagram, but it's real close. Student parents and caregivers, system impacted students, as well as transfer students. And that last line of other emerging populations is the important part of being able to evolve this definition. For example, system impacted students was an emerging population and now is squarely part of our portfolio and what we're looking at and doing and researching and supporting. Shyama, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm a little sick. I just came down with something, so I apologize for any lag on my end. All right, so a lot of these lists on this list are a given. We know that contemporary students come from a range of educational, professional, and cultural backgrounds, and that they haven't followed the traditional, quote unquote, traditional educational trajectory like students who come to college right out of high school have. Contemporary students not only come with these many identities, but at Mason and potentially across Park as well, they come with multiple intersectional contemporary identities. This means that they come with the added pressure to live, work, and learn within many systems that are very different from one another. And those systems often overlook their many identities and how they intersect. This also means that within each of those systems, there are policies, processes, and procedures that they have to routinely navigate and jump through many hurdles to overcome. So they need educators and champions like you all who can see that they need flexibility because being a student isn't their only identity or priority. They need educators who can honor that while being a student isn't their most salient identity, it is still very much a priority to them. And while they may not be the most reliable student you'll meet, they are probably most likely your most committed student. And they just need a network of folks who recognize that their bandwidth is not infinite, but is constantly working overtime.
So we can talk about experiences and what the research tells us, but being in higher ed, we all know we need to know the numbers, we need the data. So here we're looking at some national data for most of those contemporary subpopulations we spoke about. But I also looked at the fall 2023 Park University Fast Facts and some NACES data to fill in some of the data points for your institution. I didn't dive super deep into all of them, but found what I could. And so here we're talking, when we're talking about each of these populations nationally, We're looking at 40% being adult learners, and of course, for an institution like Park, that number's far higher. Military veteran connected, again, when you're an institution that caters to that population, those numbers are going to be higher. Our transfer students and student parents, for example, for us, for student parents, we know it's 1 in 5 in the nation, but here in Virginia, it's 1 in 4. 70% of those students are mothers. I want to say 88 maybe percent of those are single mothers. And a good portion of student parents, regardless of gender identity, are at or below the poverty line. Our foster care alums are a group of students who are growing, as well as I mentioned, our system impacted students. Here we're when we look at the online data, at least 54% in fall 2022 we're taking at least 1 course online nationally. And then for off campus, that number, it varies greatly, as you might imagine. But College Board says that about 40% of full-time students at public institutions are living off campus. So in our work, we often discuss these numbers to emphasize who the students are that are sitting in our physical and virtual classrooms. A lot of times our conversations are starting at this point to have the focus on the students in front of us, as opposed to the students that we might have pictured in our heads.
So one of the things that's really important here as we talk about what our students are facing and their needs is something that I talk about with my team and that we really use is to think about a road smoothing activity. So if you live anywhere in the nation, you probably experience that your roads get potholes in them, and seasonally they get repaved, right? I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. You always knew summer was there when they started actually repaving the roads. And oftentimes repaving a road means it gets smoothed out for everyone, right? And so some of the strategies that we talk about in this work really allow us the opportunity to smooth out for everyone. But oftentimes there are big potholes in our road that take special attention and special equipment and intentional investment in order to ensure that you're not falling into them. And not everybody's tires might be big enough to fall into them, right? But some people's are. And so we really talk about this work with contemporary students from a both and perspective of where do we need to make the investments to really fill the potholes, and where are the places where smoothing the road helps everyone who's engaged in this work to do better for the sake of our students.
So much of today's research on barriers that students face, particularly contemporary students, trace back to these 3 categories. First, Ekstrom studying women in higher ed, and then seminal works from Cross on adult learners. And so we are looking at these situational, institutional, and dispositional categories of barriers when we're talking about our work. And so situational being those life factors, right? We're talking about the conflicting roles that you heard us talk about earlier, resources, and there it's, yes, resources like financial resources, but it's also time resources, energy resources, bandwidth, and discretionary time, and what that looks like and means. And also the support that our contemporary students have. For institutional, we're talking structural factors. Here, also institutional can be the actual institution, the actual university, but also the government systems and processes too. You heard Shyama mention our contemporary students are navigating multiple systems throughout their time, and it's not always easy to do that. When we're talking about dispositional, those are more attitudinal. So self-perception, fear of failure, imposter syndrome, shame of stopping out or lacking confidence, but also isolation or being othered. And like any other uh, category, these barriers don't stay neatly in their boxes, right? There's creep across the categories. For example, if a student's feeling isolated, some of that can be internal, but there could also be institutional elements that can help break through that dispositional barrier or could reinforce it. So how are institutions serving contemporary students, and how are we doing that well and stepping into that gap? And that's the reason why we're here today. So let's talk about how Mason did that. Mason didn't take the path of creating individual units to serve specific contemporary populations, because most contemporary students, as I mentioned, hold more than one of those identities. That overlap of the Venn diagram that we talked about. So contemporary student services really provides that latitude to evolve alongside our student population, remain flexible, and most importantly, inclusive. We do our work. How we do our work is actually best described as ACEs. That's our acronym for this. We advocate, celebrate, educate, and serve. These are the actions that support the needs of our community, which Sally and Shyama will discuss and give you some examples of as we move into the next slides.
So one of the things that's really important within that model is certainly that we are educating our community on what our students need and what they're experiencing. And that has been one of the primary drivers in our work across our campus, is ensuring that the people around us, right, know what is needed to support these students and can become champions and allies in that work. And so to think about that a little bit globally across all these populations, there are some common threads. Students need to be counted. We need to know who is among us. You noticed that Joisanne shared a variety of data, what we could mine around your campus. Not all of that's complete, not necessarily because you don't have it, but an example is at Mason, we don't have a clear count of how many students are parenting or supporting dependents. FAFSA is an incomplete way to reflect that. But that's an example where we've made changes to ensure that that's on our application for admission. That's also not a static category. It's not something like coming to college as a first-generation student where you are always going to be the first-generation student. Children can come into our lives at any point. And so we also have opportunities for students to continue to identify as student parents through our data systems. Additionally, students need to be called in. They need to see themselves within the work that we do every day and within the ways we represent in the classroom and outside of it. And they need to feel supported in being a part of that community. Shyama certainly referenced the need for flexibility. I'm not sure how many of you on this call balance multiple of these identities, but it's likely that some of you here hold at least one, if not many of these in your work life, and also likely have specific needs that tie to that. But common among all of those is a level of flexibility. We also want to ensure that we've got things like clear guidelines, processes, and communications. When we get into our example in a minute, we'll talk about interpretation of Title IX as an example where we really needed to iron that out, where different places were doing it different ways and it was impacting students negatively. And then really important is time and space with peers. This looks different in different spaces and for different students, but we want to ensure that there are those horizontal support systems. Are we coordinated across our institution about how we support students, in particular these populations? We don't want it to be that a student has a fabulous experience when they go to one office and then they experience something completely different when they go to another. If they come to Contemporary Student Services for support and they feel like they're a part of this campus, and then they go to our student involvement office and people question why they're there, that causes friction in the system and for the student experience. And so we want to make sure our support system is horizontal. It's a bridge all the way across. We also want to ensure that we're paying attention to both the academic and the co-curricular. Are we thinking about how adult students have different experiences and may learn differently? Because when they went through the K-12 system, the way they were brought to learn is different than the way my children are right now, and the ways that we kind of balance those different things. They also really need our institutionalized advocacy, both on our campuses for specific change and outside of our campuses around national change to do this support. We want this to not just be something where a George Mason University or a Park University is the place for contemporary student services, but rather that we as a nation providing higher ed to students really have that full support. And then last, and perhaps most important, they need their presence normalized on a campus. When you look at the materials that advertise to your students about coming to your institution, will they see themselves in it? When you have a video showcasing who's graduating from your campus, do students see themselves in it? And making sure that that bridges across. Here at Mason, there are buses that drive all around the DC area. One of our misses is that every one of those buses has a picture of a person who's under the age of 25. We don't showcase on that big billboard we have. It's also on the Metro and other places that adult learners and military connected and students who are parenting are all a part of our culture and our presence here. And so it doesn't send a message to students that this is a place for them. So I think, Shyama, you're going to take us through this example, which I know they've been chatting in the chat about student parents. So we'll talk about them specifically.
Yeah, so here we've kind of used this quadrant of data, people, policy, and culture as a way to discuss our move towards supporting student parents on our campus. And we actually got this kind of format from Generation Hope, which we did the Family U cohort with. And so these are just some examples of how within data, people, policy, and culture, we've tried to build upon our support services for student parents. And you'll kind of notice that it's not easy, and we're never trying to say that it's easy, and that there's a lot of resistance. And so for data, this is just an opportunity to share how we get some of our data on student parents. So we use FAFSA data. But like Sally said, it can be very incomplete. So if somebody says that they have dependents, that's helpful. But what about our student parents who don't fill out FAFSA at all? We also work with admissions who is supporting us in getting Common App data on students who are parenting, because we recently found out that that is a question on the Common App. And this is actually a place where we could start getting more concise information. The other thing we created is a self-identification form, and we created it with the help of the registrar's office. And so we have a form that we try to push through all networks on campus for students to go ahead and self-identify as a student parent, foster care alumni, or first gen, because those are some of the identities that we can't just pull from application data or something like that. People is really about who are the folks on your campus and in your network that will support student parents. And so we're very lucky and privileged to have contemporary student services. We also have an advisory board, which is an opportunity for our students to have a voice and for us to, we don't ever want to be like the voice of our students. We really take it very seriously to amplify their needs and their narratives and their experiences. We also have a multitude of university task forces and working groups, and we ensure that we have people from all across campus that are on those so we can get as much information as possible and get things moving in the right direction. Finally, thinking about policy. So I don't know about Park. I'm pretty sure this is true for you too, but Mason is very resistant to putting anything in writing for our student parents. Right now, we have been working with Title IX to ensure that our parenting students are also covered, not just our pregnant students. And the truth is that Title IX can have different interpretations across different campuses. But we've seen how progressive an interpretation of Title IX can be in including parenting students. And because we know that that interpretation is out there, we know that we can do it on our campus too. But because it's up to the discretion of new Title IX coordinators and folks, we kind of are working hard on getting some consistency there. The other policies we currently are working on are student paid parental leave for graduate students and our minors on campus. So some of the policy, like you'll remember that you don't necessarily want to force an institution's hand to have something in writing because you don't want it to backfire on you. And so that is some of what we are navigating at Mason. In our student parent task force in particular, because policy can be so difficult to navigate, we've included procedures and processes as our subcommittee. So it's policy, procedures, and processes. And that's because we understand that while policy can and can't be implemented, culture really makes a difference on a campus. And so if a university office uses certain processes and procedures that are more in support of contemporary students and student parents, it goes a lot farther sometimes than any policy that's written. And because we know culture is so important, we really try to support our student parents through flexible office hours and encouraging other offices to do that, hybrid programming, educational opportunities that are like this for our students, faculty, and staff. So we provide some training for student leaders across campus, orientation leaders, and other peers. We also offer 2 courses for students, adult learners and transfer students, at the beginning of each semester. So it's an 8-week course so they can get to know one another, because horizontal support has been proven to support students in their retention and their graduation. And finally, we have a monthly support service for our students where they can come together. It's very casual. It's just a support space for them to kind of have time with one another, to get to know one another. And for our student parents, we have that one on Saturdays so that, you know, it's not during the work week, and it's like early afternoon. And we try different times to make sure that it actually works for our student parents. I think that that is also a part of our culture, is to not be afraid to try different things and see what actually works and speaks to our students. Finally, considering equity. So maybe in the chat, people want to kind of put maybe their favorite metaphor for the difference between equity and equality, or what that means to them. My favorite way to kind of think about the difference between equity and equality is giving everybody a pair of shoes and making sure everybody has a pair of shoes. But equity is ensuring that everybody has shoes that fit them. So equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities, but equity really recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the necessary resources to reach an equal opportunity towards success and goal attainment. So, does anybody have any examples? No worries. Okay, so things like flexible deadlines, allowance to bring their children into the classroom or have their camera turned off during virtual classes, being able to take courses remotely, even in-person courses, so that they can work while they're in school, are all really important options to providing an equitable classroom experience. And also, I guess we can move on to the next one, because to also set the tone for a more equitable classroom experience for the beginning of the semester, what you say in your syllabus speaks volumes. So it may open your eyes to folks in the class, of people that you may not have known were there. So even just making sure that students know that they can come to you and talk to you about their different identities and about their different priorities makes a huge difference. So the person who you may have written off as like slacking or disengaged may just be a parent who is working full time and taking children to school. And so this classroom guide is, and I'll upload it pretty soon, but the classroom guide is a kind of simplified version of some takeaways and things that you can include in your syllabus, or to help you kind of navigate what to include in your syllabus. In that classroom guide, I'll upload in a second, but there are some questions like these ones to chew on in trying to create something that is more equitable. And then finally, I will also be sharing a rubric. And this rubric is also a way that it's basically an exercise that we use to support campus partners in taking a deeper look at their programmatic and strategic plans, as well as their mission and vision statements and things like that. The self-assessment rubric contains 2 dimensions, each of which includes a set of components that characterize that specific dimension. And each dimension also has a kind of evolving nature, going from stage 1, which is foundation building, towards a more equitable and institutionalized campus for contemporary students. Stage 2 is quality building. And finally, stage 3, which is like a sustained institutionalization of support for contemporary students. And usually the way we use this rubric, we recommend that all folks within their office and maybe a few key campus partners or stakeholders complete the rubric independently. And then they come back together to discuss their findings. It's also important to denote that you can be at stage 1 within one component and stage 3 in another component within the same dimension. Like, it's not as linear as rubrics may make you think things should be. And I'll upload that now, and it's just a chance for people to take a deeper dive.
So I think one of the things I want to make sure to emphasize, and then we'll certainly take questions. We flew through a lot of content there, and I imagine you all might have things you want to dig a little deeper on. But really, this work has been focused on, as Joisanne mentioned, our process of both standing up direct service to students in the immediate when it's needed, but then really engaging our entire campus in education and understanding of how they can build these processes, build these policies into their work so that every student has the chance to thrive. In our division, our vision is that every student succeeds, and we really believe that. And that needs to spread across your campus. And I think that you all have, already a population that's really centered in the contemporary mindset. But are there ways that you can continue to do the work yourselves, right? You're here today, so I imagine you're invested in it, right? And willing to think about the things you could do on your syllabus or in your classroom or in your work. But are you also having those conversations with colleagues? Are you also ensuring that your institution is engaging in more work like this and, getting into conversations about this on a regular basis? And are you ensuring that those voices are also at your leadership table? It is, not an accident that I get to sit at a, high level of leadership and regularly speak about these experiences of our students and how we need to think differently about our policies and our procedures. And is your institution structured so that either you as people that are on this call or your leadership really has those voices represented in the ways that they lead? So we'll stop there. And Amber and Jamie, I think we just about hit our mark on timing to allow for several minutes of questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And for those of you who would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the hand raise feature. And if you'd like to ask the question, and you can unmute your line after we recognize you, or feel free to type directly in the chat, and we will go through and moderate those questions as they come in as well. So pick whichever version works best for you to ask questions to our incredible presenters today. We'll give everybody a couple minutes because I know sometimes we like to leave that nice, long, uncomfortable pause so that way you have time to really think through the question that you'd like to ask. And thank you guys also so much for sharing the the guide and that rubric. It was as if you were reading my mind. I was about to type in the chat, is there any place we can access this? And right then you said, here, I'll be posting it in the chat. So thank you so much for doing that. What questions do you all have for our presenters today?
I'll say for you all that I loved seeing the conversation in the chat around that horizontal support and the peer support networks, and knowing how your students are identifying what peer means. Because again, I can get really nerdy about things, being that that my dissertation, my research and things like that are around contemporary students. But that peer support space and having other adult learners, other transfer students, other student parents as part of the support network is so incredibly valuable and increases belonging, inclusion, retention, goal meeting, all of those things. And not having that can actually be can make it more difficult when for example, when an adult learner only has a peer group that is traditional students. So I'm excited to see the interest from you all in the chat for sure.
If we've stunned you into silence on questions, would also invite, if there are particular challenges you all are encountering in your work with students, or things that you're also seeing that are working, right? There are some examples that have been raised in the chat around that, but would love to hear either of those, both on the kind of rose or the thorn side of things. It's Valentine's Day. If there are particular things that you're either struggling with or really would love to celebrate here.
I actually have a question for you to that end. I think because you guys are really, you all are really trailblazers in this space, creating the first center to support contemporary students in higher education in the US. Sometimes when you are the pioneer, you have to, you face quite a few obstacles and hurdles. And I know you mentioned even, there might be some resistance to supporting this type of work at institutions. And so I guess my question for you is, what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered, and how have you maneuvered your way to still support the mission of the work that you guys are doing?
Sure. So I think one of the things that's been really important in this is, as you mentioned, we're building a new model, right? So it's not the way that people are typically used to seeing this work done. And so it's taken a lot of education to get over those hurdles of just what on earth are you doing, both with our, closest colleagues in our own division, and certainly with those outside of our division and across the institution. And so an example I'll give is, we mentioned the questions on the application that helped to start identifying students into these categories. Now, these questions are already asked on the Common App. I don't know whether ParkU is a Common App school or not, but they are asked already on the Common App, which we use at George Mason for all of our freshmen. It seemed pretty simple that we could figure out how to get that data onto our campus. It took many a phone call with an institution who was already doing this, with consultants from Generation Hope, with our vice president and the vice president of enrollment management, and our dean of admissions, who, by the way, is fabulous and has been one of our biggest allies in this work, to get the institution to take the simple action of creating a space within our data system to house this. I mean, these are just simple things, right, that allow us to do work. And I'm not downgrading the work of IT that it takes to create a space within your student information system for data. However, this isn't rocket science, right? And so, I think about those as primary examples where that's not something that is, revolutionizing how we serve students. It's just opening the door for us to serve the students, right? And so getting past those first major hurdles has been a really big part of this. I think the other thing that's been really important is people assume that this is a very small part of our population. Joisanne didn't show you our numbers at Mason, but we, by estimation, believe that 85% of our students at Mason fit into one or more of these categories, right, to the intersectional identities. And, you know, we have been an institution, if you know Mason, who really swung the pendulum toward trying not to be a commuter school and be a residential, you know, campus that's competing with, in our state, Virginia Tech and UVA. But we've done that then at the expense of swinging the pendulum toward who's actually coming to college here, right? And so we've really had to work with our colleagues to live in a both and space where we need to be able to create those great experiences for traditional age 18-year-olds coming to college as freshmen living on campus, and for all the students who aren't that, right? And those students really make up a very small portion of our population. And so I think that's really where that education piece has been so critical, is teaching our director of student involvement that while she thinks she's serving everybody with her programs, she's really not. She's serving a very small subset of our students from a traditional mindset. And how do we really expand that? Title IX, educating our Title IX coordinators on how we think about how we implement that policy on our campus, getting our legal counsel involved in that. So there are lots of hurdles. Certainly being the first is never easy. And, you know, I think our team certainly approaches this work. You know, I say I come to work every day to dismantle the old systems of higher education and build them new again for our students and their success. And I think taking on that mantle in your leadership is really important. I don't know, Joisanne, Shyama, what did I miss?
I think part of, so I came in, I mentioned that I'm in year 2 at Mason. And so Contemporary Student Services was established in 2019, and then, you know, COVID. And so between some turnover and kind of getting back to normal, whatever that means for you, we've had this chance to kind of reestablish and relaunch a little bit as Contemporary Student Services, and that's been really interesting for me. So I feel like from my standpoint in this, a lot of my work is the visibility of our students, but the visibility of our office too. And so everything from making our work consumable to others. So I'm pointing. So the advocate, celebrate, educate, and serve portion. We took a lot of time and we're talking, and it was like, you know, a late night. We have a lounge on campus that's open until 7 p.m. to accommodate our students. And so it was a late night, and we were talking through this, and we're like, well, this is what we do. Like it's been, we advocate, we educate, yes, students, but also our colleagues. And it was that, like, not quite the 3 a.m. like aha, like miracle moment of like, no, this is it. This is the way to encapsulate this. But that's been really helpful for us too, to make visible, consumable ways for others to connect into our work and to articulate it to their colleagues and become champions without needing to have complex definitions of things, without having to say, you should talk to these folks, for them to be able to be a place where a student can land or a colleague can land, and they can start that conversation and bring in other supports for them. And so I think that's a big part of what my work has been since I've been here, is that visibility of it, and ensuring that we're connecting with other folks who are doing this work. We mentioned Family U. You can also see, I picked the right background for today. You can also see that we earned the Family U seal, which is given by Generation Hope, that designates nationally institutions and nonprofits who are student parent friendly. And that was a process and a big lift, and other things like that. Our model of doing this is being recognized by NASPA. So those kinds of things are important in supporting our work in in this as well.
I see that Courtney has a
Yes.
great question in the chat. Is there a good way to go about navigating being flexible instructor, but still having expectations and accountability for students? So I teach as an adjunct here and at another institution, and I will say I think this is a perennial question, right? I think it's partially about setting the stage at the beginning, right? And ensuring that your students are clear about kind of how your policies work in the classroom. So I will say, I used to have a policy that was no late work, period, unless you had a medical or whatever situation that was covered by the university. And I've really softened on that. Now, does it mean that the student that comes in, weeks later and is like, oh, I didn't turn in that assignment because I had a thing, right, and isn't communicative, necessarily gets a free pass? No. But I think being upfront about the idea that our students are balancing multiple things, holding multiple identities, and showing up to the classroom not just as a student, right? We identified at the beginning that student is not their salient identity. And being willing to say that up front and acknowledge it and say, here's how I expect you to communicate with me if you're not going to be able to meet a deadline. I hope you'll meet all the deadlines. And here's the reality. We are all humans. And, I hope that you will come to me when you have that situation and we can discuss what we can do. I think of it many times in the same ways that I do my students with accommodations for disabilities. I get a letter from our disability services office, right, that tells me the accommodations I can and cannot give. It tells me the accommodations I have to give, I should say that differently. And then I, of course, get to, think about other things that might be beneficial to that student. But I think it's similar, right? We need to acknowledge that our students are living in multiple spaces and own that up front and be transparent that we as faculty support that. I don't know if that helps, Courtney.
I also think that options, so I know that some faculty are using new grading techniques such as like no grades. So some of it is if you complete, this many assignments, you are guaranteed to get a C. If you do these additional assignments, you'll get a B. And if you do these additional assignments, you'll get an A. And I think sometimes providing choice like that can be really helpful for students who are like, I just need a C because my life is hard. And while I may want an A, I don't have time for it. And so that can be actually a huge relief for a student to be like, I can pass this class and focus on, put my resources and energy towards something that, and some of it is like as faculty and staff, you have to take your kind of ego out of it and be humble that like, oh, this student doesn't want to like put all their engagement into this class on this topic that I love. But also it's really about just being really honest about where our students are, and their end game is that they need to graduate and they need, to have viable options, career options. And so sometimes that can be really helpful too.
Another thing that I certainly employ is, I don't know whether you all have any early alert monitor of, when students are kind of falling off the path in your classes and whatnot, whether it's attendance or assignment submissions or whatever. I do proactive outreach to my students, right? I'm not required to do that as a faculty member, but when I see they haven't logged into Blackboard in 2 weeks and, they didn't submit an assignment last week, I send them a message and I say, are you okay? Is there any, it looks like you may be falling behind. Do we need to chat? And sometimes they don't even respond to me. That's okay. But many times they're incredibly thankful and say, you know what, I can't talk today, but can I talk tomorrow? Things are going crazy right now. So using those proactive interventions, I know that's an extra load as a faculty member, and certainly at Mason, it's not required. But it really goes a long way, whether your student is identifying in a contemporary status or not.
Yeah, I do similar things in my classroom, but I also have instructor connections built into my class. So I'm meeting with students, I make that, they can book that through, I use You Can Book Me, and they can book that, and it takes my time zone and their time zone and makes those adjustments. So my folks who are globally dispersed. I could have students who live next door. I could have students who are in Japan. So it makes it easy for them to access me and make that time there. But then I'm also having a lot of conversations around, to what kind of Shyama talked about, of adult learners in particular, and many contemporary students have that like perfectionism that comes in, right? Like, I want the 4.0, like, I'm gonna do this right, let's go. And I applaud them for that. And then we have conversations about your expectations of yourself. You want an A in this class, and I get that. The university expects you to have this grade in this class. Let's aim for yours. Let's meet or beat ours, the universities. But also an 89.6 is an A. 100% is an A. Like, you've got, there's space in there that you don't have to hit 100% on every single thing to meet your goal either. And kind of talking them through, and sometimes down from, not necessarily down from their own expectations, but down from the perfectionism of those expectations, and talking about what priority management looks like and tips and tricks on how to do that, and having those conversations with our contemporary students. And much to Sally's point about what can benefit everyone, I have those same conversations with our student workers, who are mostly traditional aged, here in the office that I'm sitting in, having a lot of those same conversations with them, and our first gen students as well.
Well, I know we are at time today. I want to be respectful of our presenters' time as well as yours. And just to sincerely thank you three so much for sharing this important work that you're doing. And also for really blazing the trail for the rest of us to have a model to follow and to learn from. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all for taking time from your day to join us. We will have this available on our website. And again, hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.